On May 8, 2026, the Trump administration began a phased rollout of over 160 declassified files documenting unidentified anomalous phenomena. This release followed a years-long campaign by veterans and researchers, culminating in a presidential directive for maximum transparency across the Department of War and NASA. The release provided long-awaited official records from the Apollo era. Among them were transcripts of Buzz Aldrin describing a sizable object tracking the Apollo 11 crew near the moon, a sighting that remained unexplained even after the crew speculated it might be part of their own launch vehicle. However, the actual visual evidence was a far cry from high-definition contact. The Pentagon's trove consisted largely of grainy infrared stills, pixelated glowing orbs, and reports of bouncy ball-shaped objects over Syria that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The public had spent decades anticipating a cinematic disclosure day. Instead, they received 160 files of unresolved data, exposing the massive distance between our cultural thirst for clarity and the ambiguous reality of government censors. This shift represents the Overton window of legitimate public discussion. In a decade, UAPs moved from mocked conspiracy to mainstream policy. Sociologists call this a fact-fiction reversal, when a culture is so saturated with fiction that imagination is processed as reality, regardless of evidence. The collective disappointment with the 2026 files suggests our expectations were never calibrated by the slow pace of scientific discovery. They were engineered by 80 years of Hollywood world-building. To understand our modern demands for disclosure, we have to look back to 1956 and the film Forbidden Planet. It established the cinematic template for a spacefaring human civilization, governed by a unified planetary authority. The film introduced the Krell, an extinct alien race, whose technology served as a narrative metaphor for human failings. This specific trope, using hyper-advanced machinery to explore the dangers of human hubris, became a recurring theme in how we interpret the other. Mid-century sci-fi also introduced the public to the ethics of artificial intelligence and robotic morality. These stories provided the psychological framework we now use to process the possibility of a non-human intelligence. These films even dictated how aliens sound. The use of early electronic scores and synthetic, unearthly tones permanently associated those specific frequencies with the presence of something extraterrestrial in the public mind. By the time the first real government reports surfaced, humanity already had a subconscious list of requirements for what a real encounter should entail, based entirely on these 1950s aesthetic choices. As the 1970s arrived, blockbusters like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Alien intensified this sensory conditioning, presenting high-fidelity visions of contact that felt increasingly tangible. This chart tracks the divide in our progress. While visual effects allowed our imagination to appear limitless, understanding of interstellar propulsion remained stagnant. This gap between imagination and reality created a logical vacuum. Without a scientific theory, the public looked to fill the void. The Paleo-SETI movement capitalized on this by updating old folklore into technological myths. They suggested that what we once called gods or spirits were actually visitors with advanced technology that our ancestors simply couldn't name. This recontextualized religious history, turning traditional accounts of angels and fairies into ancient astronaut narratives. It effectively took the religious savior and destroyer roles and gave them a chrome sci-fi finish. Paleo-SETI weaponized Hollywood tropes to create a potent alternative belief system, ensuring that when the government finally spoke, the public was already primed for a specific kind of answer. In fiction, an alien threat usually unites the world. In reality, the May 2026 release triggered a deeply fractured response. Instead of global solidarity, we saw a surge in internal polarization and mutual suspicion. Rather than looking for cosmic truth, the public viewed the files through the lens of modern geopolitical paranoia. The Pentagon reports were treated with the same deep-state skepticism as the Jeffrey Epstein files, further eroding trust in institutional data. Within religious communities, the release sparked a theological panic. Pastors warned that these revelations could lead to apostasy, as the mere suggestion of extraterrestrial life challenges traditional interpretations of the biblical creation story. The pursuit of disclosure has exposed our existing societal fragilities. Every new file becomes a tool used to widen our current religious and political divisions. Despite the political theater, the 2026 release produced zero scientific proof of intelligent life. It confirmed that the government has data it cannot explain, but it provided no bridge to another world. The phased disclosure merely provided a blank, blurry canvas. Because the government's data is so ambiguous, the public is free to project their pre-existing sci-fi expectations onto the static. This fixation on declassified files acts as a cultural mirror. It reflects our own geopolitical anxieties and existential doubts back at us, using the alien as a stand-in for our own internal crises. The disappointment felt across the country reveals a deeper transformation. These screen images have embedded themselves so firmly in our collective memory that we now use 20th century cinema to dictate our 21st century reality.